All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Sorry for the delayed start. I was getting a bunch of error notifications before I was going live. But apparently it's working and all streams are active. So happy Tuesday. Welcome to another Learning Tech Talks. We're not exploring the landscape of learning tech because guess what? Sometimes life happens and your guest finds out that their flight's delayed and they're going to be in the air without Wi-Fi at the time we're supposed to go live. So I ended up deciding in the art of the pivot to switch topics and talk about probably one of the most common questions that I get, which is, how do you build a learning ecosystem? What is a learning ecosystem? How do you actually architect this thing? So I'm just going to spend some time talking about that today. And what I discovered as I was putting my thoughts together on this is we could probably make this 8 hours and I would still keep talking and we still wouldn't have gotten through it. So if you were hoping to come to this and get all your questions answered about learning ecosystems, system architecture, I hate to spoil it for you, but I probably won't get to everything. However, I really would like to make this as interactive as possible. So while I've got a pretty robust outline with a lot more than I'm going to cover in an hour, I really do want to personalize this to the folks who are joining. So if you are listening live, if you happen to check this out live, please feel free to ask your questions. And I will either let you know where it integrates into the discussion or I'll answer them ad hoc because this is a big topic. It's a high priority topic. So I'm not going to waste a bunch of time on the icebreakers, but if you are here and you want, I do see the comments. So comment in, let me know where you are in the world. I'm where I always am. It's a gloomy May afternoon here, pouring down rain and it's a bit chilly out, but at least the snow's gone. So I'm not going to complain because spring is here. Board shorts are out. I'm back to long sleeve black shirts today because, well, it's getting cold, but the t-shirts will come out soon. So with that, I want to get on the topic of this. And if you noticed in the title, I said how to make your ecosystem work for everyone. And it was a little bit of a play on words because the reality is it won't ever work for everyone. And that's why I say mostly. However, I think if you do this right, you're going to find there is a way to make this happen. So this is a little more structured than my ad hoc discussions because, hey, it's just me. And if it wasn't structured, it would be ramblings of a madman and nobody wants to listen to that. So there is some structure, but I really want to kind of start out by saying I recognize there is a lot of pressure on people right now to pull this together, to be able to talk about what is their learning ecosystem? What is your ecosystem strategy? How are you thinking about this? And there's a lot of pressure to go beyond the LMS. And I'm going to second that advocation. We do need to move beyond the LMS. But I recognize this is not an easy territory for a lot of folks to tread into. It's not people's comfort zones. It may be very unfamiliar. It is changing at lightning speed. And I think anybody who's in the space is feeling that pressure. The other thing I will find is if you Google this, or you even do a LinkedIn search, there is a fair amount of resources out there that will talk about a learning ecosystem. What is it? You can get some high level, images or things like that. But the reality is there's not a lot that goes beyond that. And I think that's adding to some of the pressure. The other thing I just want to let everybody know is it's okay if you're struggling with this. I have yet to meet anybody in the space, even some of the folks that do nothing but this, that have it all cracked. And if anybody tells you they're lying. It's literally by the time you think you figured it out, things have changed. I even look back at some of the conversations that I've done, and within a few months, what I've said is already outdated in terms of my thinking. So if you're feeling like I just cannot get ahead of this, you won't. So I think that's a really important consideration as you go into this. And I'm going to use as many examples as I can because I know just from feedback and things like that, I spend all my time speaking in this space. So for me, I sometimes just get going. So if I say something and it makes no sense, or you say, can you clarify that? Please just ask because I really want to try and illustrate this as best I can and just also make it clear that there's not a universal solution. And I will probably repeat that throughout the session. So here's kind of the general flow that I'm planning on following. And again, if you ask questions and I need to pivot, I've already had to pivot multiple times this morning anyway, so it's no big deal. But this is how I'd like it to go. And we'll see what we get to. If there's enough of a need for it, who knows? I may do another follow-up session. I may do a private session in the community, which for those of you who are listening who aren't part of it, community.learningsharks.com is a free online community that I host where we ask to have discussions and things like this. You're welcome to join, and I may do a live stream in there separately. But anyway, here's the flow that I'm planning on, and we'll see what we get to. So one is just defining what this thing is. Second, I want to get into some of the things that you really need to consider. And I'm also doing this so I can timestamp this and people know which part of the conversation to jump to. But there are a lot of myths about the learning ecosystem, the digital ecosystem, whatever ecosystem you want to call it, that I think need busting. So I'm hoping to be able to bust some of those myths while recognizing the reality of why they're there, because they exist for a reason. The other big common issue I run into that I want to address is, where do you start? This can feel extremely overwhelming, and I think there's a sense of analysis paralysis that often kicks in with folks where they just don't know where to start, so they just don't. I want to talk about prioritization, talk about some of the big categories as we dig into what this ecosystem is. There's a lot to consider, and again, it's not uncommon to feel overwhelmed, or you think you're going one direction, you get into it and go, I just bit off more than I can chew. So I want to talk about that. The other thing I want to get into is, do we build it? Do we borrow it from existing? Do we buy it? What do you think? Where should we go with that? It's a good question to ask and one worth talking about. I also want to talk about, should we look for general tools, things that the one size fits all, the all-in-ones, or is this something that we really need a specialty product? Do we need to actually specialize and get a special tool for this? The other piece is I want to get into integrations. This is a topic that is vastly overlooked and not considered enough when people are looking at system integration and building out an ecosystem or shaping it. Another common question that I hope to get to is, do we do an MVP? Do we do a pilot? Do we do a big bang? How do you consider that and make decisions? The reality is there's not a universal answer for that. I definitely have perspective on when to, and this is why I want people to give examples. I'll try and run through some use cases in terms of my thinking, and then just some closing thoughts. So that's the overall structure. Like I mentioned, where we go from here is a little bit up to you. I have some thoughts organized, so I will kick this off. And again, just starting with when you hear this term, what is an ecosystem? I think we sometimes have a habit of overcomplicating these things, and there's a lot of reasons why it happens. But the reality is, it's really just the technologies that get used for work. So ecosystem sounds better. I guess it's a more modern, fancy term to call this, but really what we're talking about is all the different technologies. Now, for me personally, when I think about an ecosystem, it's really about how are you threading that together and pulling it together into a seamless experience. And I think that's the difference between a disparate random mess of technologies and an actual ecosystem. So, I mean, but that's really what we're talking about. We're just talking about the different systems, platforms, tools that we're all using to accomplish the work that needs to be done. Now, I'm going to talk about the separation between those two, and I'm going to pull up an example of what I mean by that as we get into it. But the other thing is, the other thing I'm going to say is there's a lot of talk out there about needing to build your learning techie. We need to build the tech ecosystem. We need to build this and that. I would say you do not need to build one necessarily. If you dig into this, every single organization I talk to and have kind of collaborated with, you've got one. It's there, whether you realize it or not. I feel the same way about a tech ecosystem as I do about a learning culture. You have it. It's in existence, whether you realize it or not. It's just a matter of whether or not it's working for you, and it falls into that category of discombobulated technologies that are just in existence, or it's actually threaded together in a meaningful way. So that's where I would say it's less of a, if you're feeling like, oh my goodness, this is a start from scratch, blank canvas exercise. I don't think in 2022 I've ever encountered anyone who's truly in this blank space starting from scratch, unless you're a total startup on your own trying to truly start from scratch. But even then, you probably have an ecosystem in place of other workplace tools. The other thing is you are going to need, so when it comes to this whole what is an ecosystem, the reality is you are going to need to borrow or buy pieces of this thing. So the idea that you're going to own this insulation and it's going to be all you, it's not. So that kind of transitions into some of the considerations or myths that I often hear when it comes to the learning ecosystem that I think we just need to get rid of it. Is one, this is just a few things. It's just a handful of things. A lot of times the conversation around this is it's the employee experience piece. This is not just a few things. And I think this is where people who start treading into these waters quickly feel like they're up to their neck, their chin, and are wondering, how am I going to navigate this? Because this gets very complex very quickly. And then this is where it can get overwhelming. So if you're thinking you're just going to have to pick one or two things and manage that, I hate to break it to you. Well, first of all, one, this shouldn't be overwhelming though, because like I said, you're doing this now. A lot of this is happening already. If anything, actually taking the time to look at your ecosystem and build this out is going to create less work. And I think that's one of the encouraging things I often, when I talk to people about this, hope to encourage people with, is that the goal of this is actually to reduce your work and reduce the complexity, not add more. Even though through this process, a lot of times you may feel like it's net new. You might be adding two things. You may be repurposing existing tech, but you also may be adding net new. But ultimately, this is designed to simplify things. The other myth that happens a lot, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, is there is still, in many regards, the belief that the LMS can be your ecosystem. That at some point, if you pick the right LMS, if you finally get to that place where you get rid of that thing, is the fact that that'll solve it. And the reality is it's not, which, spoiler alert, if you're looking for the single solution, if you watch my show, you know I've talked to hundreds of vendors publicly on the show. Now that doesn't count the hundreds of vendors I've talked to that I'm not on live stream with. And what I can tell you is there is no single solution out there, and nor would you want there to be one. Honestly, and I think that's a reframing of things. Sometimes there is this perception of, well, couldn't we get to the point where we get down to one or two solutions? Just to give an example of where you may flip that narrative on your head, is the fact that if I told you, couldn't you get to a point where your iPhone only had one or two apps on it, you would probably laugh me out of the room. If I suggested that you could have one or two apps on your phone, you would just say, well, there's no way. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I don't even want to pursue that as an end game. Yet so frequently that's what we're doing when it comes to our tech stack. We're saying, well, how do we consolidate this down to the one or two things that we can use? And in life, we wouldn't do that. So if that's kind of one of the goals or the visions that you have in defining your system, I would actually challenge you to reframe that. I think you'll be better off if you say, no, actually, this may be a very complicated suite of technologies, not a single one or two. Because if you do that, you really are chasing the wind. That's, with as much tech as I talk to and as many ecosystems as I've architected, it's actually, you want to be going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to pause there. Maureen, really good point on this. Yes, to the ecosystem question, it may not be that you don't have one, or it's probably just not defined or organized. It's organized chaos, or in many cases, and I'll talk about this on the other side, is that a lot of times you either use your tech so seamlessly you don't think about it. It's second nature. You're just using it, so you're not actually thinking about what's actually in there. Which, chances are, if you're doing that, other people don't know that you're doing that. And so that's where some of that disorganization, the silo, comes in. It's not this intentional effort for people to work off in their silos. They're just using things so seamlessly. When they get a questionnaire that says, what tech do you use for learning and development? They're not thinking, oh yeah, all these tools that I use every day and naturally use. They're not hiding that or withholding it. It's just, you don't think about it. So I think that's a really important piece. Is some of it is we just need to think a little more deeply about it. And the reality is, our field is very complex. one of the biggest frustrations I've had being in the field for as long as I have is it's often oversimplified. The work we do, and now that's not to say, oh, learning and development is the most complex, greatest industry in the world, even though I would say it is pretty awesome. But it is complex. We're dealing with people, we're dealing with stakeholders, we're dealing with the complexity of human behavior in massive distributed organizations with multiple languages, different culture. I mean, we're dealing with a lot. And so when you're trying to do that, you can't simplify it down to one or two things. And so when you're thinking about this, I just don't let the complexity overwhelm you, but at the same time, don't think that oversimplifying it is the end game, because it's not, and it shouldn't be. And if anything, that may lead you down paths that actually creates more problems than solutions for you. The other thing I just want to banish, if I could wave my magic learning tech wand, it'd be the idea that learning needs to have its own ecosystem. Learning needs to define its ecosystem. Now, granted, in reality, the complexity I just talked about is real. And so there will be some degree of a learning tech ecosystem, yes. But I think we may be doing a disservice when we socialize and talk about it as its thing. And again, I love analogies. Some people they land on, other people they don't. So if it doesn't make any sense, tell me, and I'll try and re-clarify through a story or something like that. But when you think about marketing, we do a lot of comparisons to marketing. You will not find marketing going to functional meetings talking about MarTech. They are not going to the meetings and selling the MarTech ecosystem and how they're thinking about MarTech and what we need to do with MarTech. And the reason being is that most people in the room would fall asleep because they don't care. And not because it's not important, not because it's not valuable to the organization or meaningful. It's just that they're trusting you're taking care of a lot of this. That's why they hired you. They don't necessarily need all of this. Now, granted, should you be fully prepared to talk about it? Yes, because we've all been in that meeting, regardless of what level you're at. We've all been in that meeting where you say, somebody asked the question and you just go, good grief, are you serious? Like, why do you want to know that level of detail? And we have to be prepared for that. While at the same time, we can't lead with that, because the reality is we're just going to frustrate and confuse people, and they don't care. And that's not a bad thing. And trying to make them care, again, going back to just like having the vision of couldn't we get down to one or two solutions? Probably the wrong question to be asking. Just like, well, can't we get them to care about our learn tech stack? No. And probably trying to want them to or make them is likely the wrong path to take. So with that, let's kind of move away from this idea of learning tech. I think we can talk about it in terms of learning professionals, but I think we need to be really careful, and we may be doing a disservice to ourselves when we talk about it, things like that. So another couple consideration myth to bust. I a lot of times hear people, and people will reach out and say, look, we're looking to build this, but we are on a shoestring budget, or we don't have a massive team. It is a myth that your tech ecosystem has to be this Mercedes-Benz or Aston Martin. My son's big into cars right now, so I'll think of a Bugatti of technologies. It doesn't have to be. And I think sometimes that discourages folks who maybe don't have the big budgets or the big teams or aren't with the big companies. They may feel like this isn't for me. This is for the big Fortune 100 companies of the world, not the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses who are just figuring out learning and development. And so it's a conversation that's often tabled. And I think that's a huge, huge disservice to what you can do and really to the effectiveness of the work we do within your organization. So again, don't think that because you don't have a multi-million-dollar budget or a staff of tens of potentially hundreds of heads to manage that you really have no place in the tech ecosystem conversation, because it's not true. Don't, again, and I know this might be a lot of myth busters, and then I'm going to get into some of the use cases. Don't try and copy and paste other people's tech ecosystems. It is a common question of, well, what is this org doing? Or what is this org doing? Or what are you doing? What tech are you prioritizing? Good to ask questions, hear why people made the decisions they did, But if you're looking for a blueprint that you can copy, paste, and just lay on top of your organization, I'm just going to caution you right now. It's not a good approach to take. So again, have the conversations, ask lots of questions, get insight into the decision-making process of others, but don't try and copy and paste. Similar to trying to get down to one or two platforms, finding that perfect ecosystem you can copy and paste over is an exercise in futility. It really is. The last piece, well, let me see here. Yeah, you know what? I'll get into this. But the other thing is, some people shy away from this because tech is not their comfort zone. So I will say I leaned into this early on because I love tech. It's just, this is a hobby for me. If I did nothing else, I would sit and talk tech all day long. I could, like I said, I could have this conversation by myself, just knowing somebody's listening to it for the better part of multiple days. That's not everybody, and I recognize that. And so sometimes what can happen is, because people feel like they're not technical, they're not a systems engineer, they're not somebody who understands all the complexities of integrations and XAPIs and yada, yada, all the other funky terms that people get into, that I just need to steer away. And I think that's what leads people to want to move to, can I just buy the one thing and call it a day and be good with it? Don't let that steer you away. And I think with that, sometimes it's a step in saying, you know what, I don't know. And if there's one thing that I encourage people to do a lot in this space, it's to get help with it. And it's not a slam at all. I think sometimes people think, well, if I ask for help, it means I'm somehow less than, or I don't have a capability that I should. And the reality is that's not really true. It's not really true. It's not true at all. This is something that is moving extremely fast. Like I said, I'll probably look back on this conversation in a week or two and go, oh, well, you know what? My thinking has evolved based on XYZ conversations, and my advice here would actually be different. Or in this situation, I would pivot this. This is moving really quick. And the reality is, I had somebody the other day ask me, should I build out this capability internally? Should I build out, a tech arm of my organization? And based on their situation, my advice was no. A lot of times I actually advise people don't actually try and build out this future focused lens internally, because it does move so fast. And the fact of the matter is, you're going to end up frustrating that internal team, because to keep up, no org can actually keep up with it. I mean, good grief. I won't mention analyst names, but if you follow LinkedIn at all, it seems like every other day a new post of the latest, greatest trend, this and that, is coming out. Everybody needs to be doing talent marketplace, talent mobility, academies, cohort based. I mean, literally, these things are changing by the week. No organization can keep pace with that. You can't. And what I found is, sometimes in orgs, they've tried to build out this internal capability. It doesn't last very long, because they get frustrated. They have all these great ideas, all these great solutions, and the org just has to say, not now, no, we're not ready, type of a thing, and for good reasons. And so this is an area where looking for help externally can be really, really valuable, and not because, somehow we fall short. But I think this is another mindset shift where sometimes orgs are thinking, we really need to build this out as a full internal capability. If you have it, great. If you have someone like Michael or, Jack Sylvester or some of these other folks, I know that we could nerd out on this, and this would be our idea of a fun Friday evening. If you have that, great. I'm not saying get rid of it, but if you don't have that and you're saying, hey, we need to build this, I mean, the time you're going to take to find the talent, build this out, there are not a lot of organizations where I recommend that as a strategy. Again, are there times where people might go, well, you did this other time? Yeah, you're right. There are times that I will, and there are times that I say it makes sense. There are other times where I go, it's not worth your time, and you're going to spend more money trying to build it out, and they're going to get frustrated and quit than it's worth. So there's just a handful of the considerations. That was a very large handful, probably more like a I don't know, snow shovel full. But anyway, so let me transition out of that. If you have other considerations, or if there's things or myths that you've heard, or even personally, you're like, well, isn't it this? ask them along the way. I'll pop them up. And even if you disagree with me, go ahead and disagree with me. I should just kind of have a little thing, running on the bottom that says, here's my opinion, change my mind. I'm definitely open to discourse and dialogue because I recognize I've just got a point of view on this. Now, let's shift to where to start. So this can be an overwhelming exercise in terms of, oh my goodness, you just told me there's all this complexity. You just said we've got to do all this stuff and it's insanely complicated. Yes, that is true. So then where do we start? And hang on here. I'm going to pull something up that hopefully will help illustrate it a little bit, although whatever, I'm having issues with it. So we'll see. I'll share this after the fact. But the biggest thing is where to start is to actually map out your capabilities. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make when it comes to working on their tech ecosystem stuff is they're trying to do it in terms of platforms. Okay, they're going out and they're saying, well, perfect, it works now. They're shopping platforms. What platforms do we need in our ecosystem? Do we need or acronyms? That's another one. Do we need an LMS, an LXP, a DAP, an LCMS, a TCMS? I mean, good grief, the acronyms are wild. So it can be easy to start with that. And when you do that, that can be really overwhelming in the sense that, well, okay, that's not where to go. And that's not what I mean by capability. And I'm going to bring this up just very quickly. Again, do not copy and paste this. It's an idea starter. But when you think about your ecosystem and capability, actually strip out the acronyms and platform names. Now, like I said, if you tried to copy this and said, well, that's not my ecosystem or that's not my capability map, you're probably right. It probably is not, nor should you try and copy and paste this and say, hey, here's our capability map, because it probably is not. Now, are there things you could take from this? Could you ask me follow-up questions as to how I made the decisions to map this for one situation? Yes. Is it something you could build off of? Yes. But the point of this is when you're thinking about your capabilities, think in terms of layman terms. What are we doing? And get granular with this. This is one of the things where I see people gloss over this really quick and they just go, oh, well, content management. Okay. Content management in how? Like, are we just talking user generated? Are we talking about our content? Are we talking about curation? Are we talking about from external sources? Are we talking content you really have to scratch beneath the surface in this. If you're just saying, oh, project management, oh, like project management, resource management, are you getting into the granularity of all of that? Do you need to? Maybe you don't. Maybe it does matter for your organization because you're outsourcing and billing by the hour. Maybe you're a corporation and you don't need that kind of granularity. Again, I talk fast, so stop me if you need to. But I think the biggest thing that I will say in terms of capability, couple things to consider with this. There are two categories when I think of capabilities. One is our internal capabilities, the things we need to do our work, our work internally. The behind the scenes stuff that most people don't even think of or know about unless they're in L&D. And even some people in L&D may not know what the right may not know what the left is doing type of a thing. So there's that internal capability. Then there is this employee facing side where our end users, our employees are actually engaging with this. Those are two distinct categories of capabilities you need to think about when you're thinking about this. And one of the things that I will tell you, I see time and time again on this, and I'll float this in and out, is we often under-index on our internal capabilities. We just let the assumptions go that, okay, we don't really care, we don't need to know about, or it just happens. That is a miss. And Ryan Austin and I talked about that. I think it was last week or the week before, talking about this internal operations. The quality of our output is fully dependent on the quality of our operations. And I often see organizations having this, futuristic vision of where they want to go, and their internal operations is a dumpster fire. It's just an absolute dumpster fire. And and they find themselves just struggling with this. And technology can help here. And some of that internal ops technology should be higher priority than your employee facing technology. Now, again, don't quote me on that and go to your leader and say, hey, Christopher said we don't need to prioritize this because this is more important. I don't know your situation, but what I can tell you is I've seen a lot of dumpster fires, like a lot of dumpster fires. And I've seen organizations struggle with figuring out why can't we get to our future state? And those dumpster fires are the root cause of it. And so they're constantly pushing to solve for that employee side. And they don't realize that, hey, if we don't get our internal ops in order, we don't even have the capability, the visibility, the capacity to do any of the things that we could push on the employee side. So again, now is that me encouraging everyone go out, prioritize your internal ops? No. Do I think there's opportunity? Yes. And do you need to account for that in this bigger capability map? Yes. If you're doing an L&D capability map, trying to define what is your ecosystem or what are the capabilities you need to consider, and you're not considering your internal ops, it's a miss. So that's going to be one of the things where to start. Start with your capabilities. Make sure you're considering both your internal ops and your employee facing ops. Now, I see two ends of the spectrum on this that I'm just going to caution people on. Is there tends to be two extremes on this. One is the capability casting of just what we do today. Let's just talk about what we do today. And I think that's a miss because you're not Omer Glass from Growth Space taught me. I picked up this word from him. I'm not going to pretend I came up with it myself, but edge casting. I love it. I love the idea of this edge casting where you have to cast beyond where you are today. If all you're looking at is what are you doing today, you're never going to get beyond where you are. That's a big piece of this. So one, don't go too small. Don't go too small and think, hey, I'm only thinking about where we are today, but also be careful in that edge cast that actually, no, let me clarify this. On the edge cast, go as big as you want to go. You're going to need to prioritize accordingly. If your capabilities have a lot of your edge cast stuff you're not doing, but you'd like to do, just know you're going to need to prioritize accordingly. If you got a dumpster fire and a hot mess on your employee facing tech and you're thinking, but we want to be out here, just know you're probably going to have to prioritize some of that first, but don't leave it off the map, because I think that's then where organizations they stay in the rut of what they've always done. So Toby, good question in terms of this. Is some of this point of view assuming that HR and L&D are already aligned? And my answer to that is no. In fact, I've yet to ever partner or work with an organization where that alignment is ever in place, let alone ever fixed. I think there's always the tendency for divergence, fragmentation. It's always there. And I don't think I've ever seen it where everyone's always aligned to it. Now, can you get greater alignment? Yes. But the other thing that I'll say is, realistically, I've spent most of my career in ops, in operational functions, and you want to talk fragmentation. Massive fragmentation across business silos, across business functions. So that's another one of those, kind of thinking the vision and future is where everybody's aligned. We have a nice central budget, central resources, IT's in perfect alignment with what we want to do. That's a pillar that will never exist in your limitations. So just don't. So my assumptions are always it's chaos. It's organized chaos, and the chaos is only getting worse. So how do you navigate within that chaos? Because to your point, Toby, trying to convince people, and hopefully as we get into this, that we need to fix it, and people look at it and go, well, it's not broken, so why would we invest time and resources? That is a real challenge. And as we get into this, in terms of your comments, would it change my where to start? No, it would not. The focusing on what are the capabilities, and again, capture this from across your fragmented, messed up, discombobulated organization. What are the capabilities? You're just putting it on a map. You're not saying we're committing to this or we're prioritizing it. You're really just nailing down what are we doing today. And I think what you'll find just personally from experiences, when you start doing this, a lot of people are using different lingo and language. Us folks in HR or those who have been in L&D, we speak a different lingo than folks who are operators that moved into a sales enablement role, and now they're enabling salespeople, but they were a salesperson. They don't speak the same language, but we're talking about the same things. And I think that's what that capability exercise does, is it gives you an opportunity to find alignment where it may look like you actually are fragmented. One of you is saying one thing, one of you is saying another. Reba, you bring up a good point. Education's the same way. We all talk about these things. We use different language. It sounds like we're all on these disparate paths trying to solve different problems, when in reality, when you dig underneath and you actually rip back, I've been watching the Shrek series with my kids, the layers of the onion, it's the same thing. In many regards, what we do across industry, across field, across function, we're doing the same things. We might be doing it differently. We might be talking about it differently. We may have different priorities, but at the end of the day, we're trying to solve the same problems. And so I think that's where that capability map can work as an alignment exercise to say, hey, let's get alignment around what are the things we need to do. Maybe you'll get some alignment on the language, that we use. You might not. You might just become trilingual or quadlingual or whatever lingual you want to be able to say, okay, this is how our operations team talks about it. We're talking about this. This is how compliance talks about it. This is how so-and-so, and you may switch your lingo if you're leading this, but ultimately it can create greater alignment. And where you may say, hey, we're going down a path from a technology, and you feel like you're fighting against people, you'll be able to create that greater alignment. But like I said, if you don't have the capabilities, if you're talking terminology, acronyms, things like that, you're going to end up creating problems that don't need to be there. You're going to create complexity you can actually avoid by doing that. So I want to talk about this employee-facing internal ops exercise and why I really want to emphasize the difference between these two, because these really are the two biggest buckets. I already emphasized, so I won't just kick a dead horse on this, that we need to spend more time thinking about our internal capability. I mean, if you look at my sample map here, 3/4 of it is internal. And I think that's one of the misses, is that we make that 25%, 90% of our priority. We're investing 90% of our effort into 25% of the ecosystem that actually gets work done and allows us to innovate. And I think that's where we just need to flip things a bit. Now, if you don't have a dumpster fire, if you're in great shape, your ops are all cleaned up, first of all, call me. I'd love to just sit down and have a conversation, because this is an area that, hang on here, that I think a lot of people are struggling with. But again, just flipping that. Now, are there times where these will overlap? And this is a really important consideration, going back to this idea of, okay, first of all, hopefully I've influenced your thinking to move away from, can't we get down to 1 or 2 apps to run all of learning and development? No, I really hope, if anything, people walk away from this going, no, we shouldn't. We shouldn't even be thinking that way. We shouldn't be talking that way, because the words we use matter. And if this is what all our stakeholders are thinking, because they don't understand the complexity. So their tendency is to think, well, couldn't we get down to 1 tool? And if we don't get in front of it and change the narrative, change the way we're talking about it, this is a barrier that is going to keep hitting us, because they're thinking it. We're thinking it. We're thinking it. Our industry is thinking, can't we get here? So, and we understand the complexity. We get the complexity, and we have a tendency to go, well, couldn't we get to 1, 2, maybe 3 things? So think about what the CFO, any operations leader, anybody is thinking when we're going, hey, we need to diversify, or we need to buy another tool. Your IT leader, what do you think they're thinking when you show up at the next meeting where you're pitching your new tool, and they go, oh, yeah, you want another tool? They are already thinking that. So we have to be 10 times harder at working 10 times harder to change the thinking that 20% is where all the investment needs to happen, and that we need to consolidate that down to 1 or 2 things. So Reba, to your question, yeah, I'm happy to share I'll put I don't know, I'll comment it in the notes or something like that. But so anyway, so that's one thing there as you kind of think about this employee facing. Now, are there times, going back to this, are there times they're going to merge? It depends. Yeah, I know sometimes people get really frustrated with me when I say it depends, but this gets really complicated really fast. And are there times you are going to have to consider bleeding the edges between, was this technically employee facing or L&D facing? And do we take the risk of going for something that's employee facing because it gets trajectory and traction for budget, resources, funding, whatever, mind share, if we make it employee facing? Yes. There are times you are going to have to navigate that decision. There are considerations that you need to make when you think about that, though. And the biggest one that I will say, yeah, I know, Rudy, Rudy, you get it with this. I say it depends a lot, and I would encourage people to say that a lot. That it's okay to say it depends, because there is a lot of nuance to this. Now, one of the biggest considerations, though, when we think about internal ops versus employee facing, is what are you signing yourself up for? And I think that's one of the things, and let me give you a use case with this. So there's a tendency right now, there's a big push, there's a couple players out there, and I'm going to be really careful not to mention names, just because I have to be careful, because sometimes I say a name and then people think I'm pitching for them, and I'm not. But there's a tendency right now, going back to this consolidation mindset. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a platform where we designed our content, collaborated on our content, it managed all our content, it deployed all our content, and all our analytics were in this platform as well? Maybe, with caution. And again, one of the biggest things is you have to consider what happens the more eggs you put in one basket. And again, going back to what I said earlier on, I mean, 2 days can't go by before the next latest, greatest trend pops up. So I just was talking with somebody about this the other day, where they were in the position of trying to decide, do we integrate our content development with our content management and content deployment capability? And as we dug into it, and again, do not take this answer as, oh, Christopher said we should never do it. No, that's not what I'm saying. But in this situation, them adding all the crossover added way too much complexity. It was going to result in everything was going to be in one place. And if they ever needed to move, they were going to lock themselves into an impossible position to ever get out of. Now, to Sonia, you come up as LinkedIn user, but I know it's you. In a global organization where you're dealing with all of this complexity, it only gets bigger. And that was the biggest risk. It was this big organization with functions all over the place, speaking 80 million languages, trying to do all this, and to try and pull that all into a single solution was going to open them up to way too much risk. So on paper, it looked great. On paper, it looked great. In practice, the level of risk it was going to introduce into the organization was far too great to do it. So my point in this employee and internal is this all shifts back to this idea that, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could get to one or two? If my ecosystem map could be a single dot on this screen. And the reality is, I don't think you want it that way. You really don't. So I think there's that. And then Toby, you bring up another good point that I am going to spend some time emphasizing on this. And it goes back to, I understand where it comes from. Be careful the all-in-one solution. And again, I know some really great all-in-one solutions, and I've recommended all-in-one solutions for certain situations based on the maturity of an organization, based on the size, the complexity, what they were, type of a thing. Tread carefully. And the reason for this is that, the term Toby throws up, it makes perfect sense. When you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. Now, are there some organizations that have the resources and the horsepower to actually pull it off? Yes. But you also have to keep in mind, and this is the other thing, and I think sometimes it's easy to overlook this. This is a money game. When you're in the tech space, we're talking dollars. And I think this is where we have more power in this space than we realize. It's a money game, and where the money is where the resources and energy is going to go. So as long as we as an industry are demanding X, a single solution, okay, where's the energy going to go? All the tide, all the investment, all the VC dollars are going to go into trying to create the one source, one size fits all platform. But the reality is there's only so many resources. And so when you're trying to be everything to everyone, it's nearly impossible to specialize in anything and do anything really well. Think about this in terms of human development. We talk about T-shaped development for a reason. We talk about the fact that we ask employees to say, hey, don't try and be a specialist in absolutely everything, be a generalist in things, and then go deep in one area. And the same thing's true of our tech. Now, are there opportunities where you would say, hey, you know what, there's some general capabilities that we can probably generalize and have a single solution for that? Yeah, for sure. But if you say, can that single solution then hyper specialize in this one area that's business critical to our function? Probably not. In fact, I would say I don't think I've ever seen it. So there's that piece as you think about it. And so, Larry, I'm going to pull up your question because I think it's a good one. So from where to start, L&D capabilities are designed to achieve L&D outcomes. How can we reframe the outcome conversation that guides the need capabilities? This is where, okay, so with this one, the help needed, going back to this capability piece, even this example that I use, and this is my caution because I said I'll share this, but I'm doing it with a big caveat, which is this is still written in L&D speak. So would I ever advocate that you take this capability map and float it in front of your CFO and say, here's what we need to do? No. And the reason being, experience architecture means absolutely, it may mean nothing to some people who end up watching and listening to this. Experience facilitate, that may mean absolutely nothing to some of the folks who watch this. And I think that personalization of the language and being able to know what these capabilities are, yet float seamlessly between the language and tie it to business use cases or situations. Just let me give you one example with this one. So I was doing some work and we were talking about, and this ended up not even being in a learning and development stack thing, there was an organization struggling with the challenge of how do we get people to use Salesforce better? The sales teams are not using Salesforce to the best of their ability, type of a thing. What kind of capabilities should we look for in this? And really, it was a matter of trying to figure out how do I frame a human problem with a technical solution. And I think that's where getting help with this can be extremely beneficial because you may not speak the technical lingo, and being able to translate and becoming bilingual may not be the right use of your time and resources. You may be better off having somebody help you figure that out. But along those lines, they were trying to solve a Salesforce problem, which sounds like a system problem, which sounds like a training problem. But the real solution was, from a human behavior standpoint and an end user experience, the sales teams, at the end of the day, after they've been driving back and forth to meetings all day long, they don't want to load up their computer and log into Salesforce and fill out a CRM. So the technical solution was, couldn't we use NLP and NLU to have them be asked questions as they're driving in the car, and then Alexa or whatever, ambiguous AI name could just simply populate the CRM with those solutions. And so being able to talk about that in terms of human problems resulted in a very quick business justification, budget approval, and things moving across the finish line. And the reason being, we weren't speaking in terms of L&D speak, and we weren't speaking technical speak. We were speaking in terms of business problem speak. And again, I joke about it. It's kind of a joke made in jest, but really I joke that I'm trilingual in that. And I think that, oh, sorry, see even there, Rudy, thanks for NLP, natural language processing. It's the AI capability that actually allows the real-time closed captioning that you're seeing on LinkedIn right now, that's a result of NLP. It's actually analyzing what I'm saying, translating that into actual words and making it pop up in real time. There's no way I could humanly sit and type as fast as I can talk. So with that, it was really about reframing this and still knowing what the L&D language is, because if you end up going business problem language and that's the only language you speak, the challenge is it's very hard to then shop for a vendor that'll solve for that. It's extremely hard to do that because that's not what the L&D vendor marketing speak is. And a lot of times their business development people don't speak that may not speak that business language. So it is really valuable to understand the three different languages that are floating around. There's this technical language that's floating around. There's this business problem, human problem language that's floating around. And then there's this L&D lingo that's going, and being able to float and translate that we're not speaking about three different things. We're just illustrating it using three different languages is an extremely powerful tool in actually solving for this. I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere near any of the things that I wanted, but so anyway, hopefully but again, that's the goal for me to pivot to the questions that come up. So that's it on kind of the employee facing internal ops. Again, there's a lot more that I think we could dive into. I want to jump though to the build, borrow, buy. Do we generalize? Do we specialize? I get a ton of questions on this from folks. Should we buy this? I'm hearing the build less frequently, but it still rears its head every once in a while. Well, couldn't we just build this internally? Or do we borrow from other things? And then do we go for that general, like I said, the T shape as we think about the tech? Do we go very general and kind of get it does it all, but it doesn't necessarily do it super, super, super well? And I'll give some use cases in this. Let me just say this. I almost never, ever will advocate for someone to build a product. At least not on the practitioner side. Are there times where I've advocated for vendors to build? Yes, that's a different story. So I know I have a vendor audience that listens to this too. Don't take that and say, oh no, let's just borrow. But I think even in the vendor space, there's opportunity. I've seen vendors try and build out new capabilities in their platforms. And I think there's opportunities for strategic alliances. Just as an example, and I'll use this as an example. I said I wasn't going to name vendors, but there's one that I think has done a really great job with this. Bongo. They were a video, I don't even know how to describe it. But anyway, they did a lot with video. And initially they were going down the path of creating this consumer end product. And they pivoted. We talked about this. They pivoted to focus more on how do I actually partner up with vendors and build that capability into their product. And so even on the vendor side, I think there's opportunity to say, hey, you can still specialize in a capability, change your marketing, change your strategic market approach to, well, you're instead of trying to sell into L&D functions as a disparate tool, see if you can partner up with a vendor. And I think there is opportunity for that. But on the build side, should you build as a practitioner? Honestly, I can think of a very small handful of cases where I would ever say it's a worth, and I've heard the conversation, can't we just build an LMS? No, don't even try it. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your engineering resources. Your company needs them on other things. I am so thankful for the SaaSes and the PaaSes. Software as a solution, platform as a solution. I'm so thankful for that because that capability, the ability to specialize, invest time, resources, dollars in something is there now. You could never do that before. So again, the big caution I would say is if build, like legit engineering resources, committing IT resources to build something comes into the conversation, I just, again, would tread extremely carefully with that one. I can rarely think of an instance. Now, the borrow and buy, okay, this is the horizontal versus T-shape. Do you really need a custom fit L&D solution for this? I would say this goes back to your tech capability map. How important is this capability to the work that you're doing? How high of a priority is it for you? And your answer may be different, and there's not a right or wrong answer. And I think that's where I caution people when they try and copy and paste other people's ecosystems is, what may be hyper important for one organization, and they say, no, we actually need an adaptive engine built into our content development tool because of the compliance or safety risk associated with knowledge in our organization. Well, that's very different than an organization that's like, I mean, we want them to know it, but ultimately it's not life or death if they do or don't. So again, those decisions to go, well, do we need to hyper specialize in a custom fit tool for our organization, or can we get by with an LMS that has a content creation tool built into it? Maybe. Do you need a hyper specialized video production tool that creates feedback loops? I don't know. How important is it to your priorities? And I think that tech capability will help you define and prioritize that piece. Some good examples, though, of where to borrow. If you're looking to prove out validity, I'm so going to run out of time on this. But when it comes to borrowing, if you think, right, let's say you've done your capability exercise and you go, you know what, I really think we'd get a ton of lift out of trying to do this. This is an example of where I would encourage people, you know what, you might want to borrow something first and see, because you may think it's the greatest idea in the world and it's going to transform the world as you know it at your organization. And you may get 5 steps in and realize this thing's the Hindenburg. It's going down in a few minutes. And that's better to figure out on something you borrowed from somewhere else. If you think you're going to transform project management and you want to buy a custom fit L&D project management tool, well, why don't you see if Monday works and you can even get people managing their projects before you decide to actually do it, type of a thing. If you're lacking in budget, it's a great way to prove out capabilities, show the organization what you can do, and then say, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could do this 10 times better? A third one is, does it actually, does what you need it to do, can it accomplish it? If you just borrow something, you know what, honestly, it does 90%. That 10% that's nice to have is not really that critical. That's then where I would say those are really good times to borrow, test it out and see where it's buying. And again, I could spend an hour talking about the buy piece to this, but one caution on the buy side is sometimes there's a tendency to borrow and you vastly underestimate the time, energy, and resources that go into customizing these borrowed solutions. And again, conversation I had with Ryan Austin last week, where we're MacGyvering together an internal operations platform, and it feels cheaper because, hey, we get it for free because IT is paying for it. But the time, energy, and resources you're spending vastly outweighs the license costs for a SaaS. That's one where, and I'll just say this is an opportunity for senior leaders sometimes in our space to make this mistake because we don't understand the complexity that goes into the work, and it can look good on paper to go, no, just use what we've got, not realizing that your work teams are spending countless hours actually kind of grueling through this stuff. And it's like, well, think how much more we could do if we spent X dollars a month on something that actually solved for it. So anyway, I'm over time. I'm over time on this. So I've got like 73 more bullets to go, but hopefully at least from a start standpoint, I will share this on here. I will share this capability. If anything right now, seek some help from folks, ask around, don't copy what they're doing. Start with the capabilities. Once you get into it, don't try and prioritize this whole grid. So kind of couple closing thoughts, and then I may have to do a follow-up. Once you get into this, don't try and solve your whole ecosystem. You won't. You just won't. Narrow it down to a handful that you can really fix and focus on, and also know when to pull the plug. The other thing is that, yeah, I'm not even going to get into this because if I do, I'm going to end up going way, way, way over. So the last thing I'm going to say is no matter what you do, you're not going to make everyone happy. And that's why I say when it comes to priorities, if your priority is making everyone happy, you will never get it done. So move that priority out. I talked, rewind back to the beginning and some of these myth busters, shift your mindset on some of these myths. And I think some of those priorities will help fall in place. So with that, I'm gonna kind of do an abrupt end here because otherwise I got to jump to something else. But thanks all. Hopefully you got something out of this. If there is a need to do more of this or continue on the discussion, I'm happy to do another session when it fits. But I appreciate all the collaboration, all the comments coming in. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope you have a great Tuesday. I will see you on the other side.